gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Crimes and Closings. I'm Jenny Olsen-Payton.
And I'm Tia Kappelman.
And we get together twice a month to kind of talk about new and unusual, or maybe some true crime that you've never heard of before, and throw in a little real estate spice on top of that. Now...
We need a correction.
Jenny,
how many days are in a year?
365. So last time I happened to say, my dyslexia got the best of me, I said 349, just over a year. I meant 394. So thank you for those of you that pointed that out. I do, in fact, know what a year is. But I was having a bit of an off day. So we need to come up with something like, some kind of like catch phrase for our corrections, because I'm sure there's going to be more of them. I'm sure. So today Miss Dia is going to be entertaining us, and I'm a little disturbed. She had asked me to bring a top hat, and 3 o'clock in the morning I sat bolt upright in bed and realized I did not have a top hat. So she's wearing the bunny ears, and I'm not quite sure why, and she's trying to get me to drink something. So I am a little afraid.
Well, I have invited you to a tea party.
Okay.
So I was thinking, bunny ears, Mad Hatter.
Nice.
You love Alice in Wonderland.
Love Alice in Wonderland.
So I thought you would enjoy a tea party.
I did. I'm sorry I failed you.
That's okay.
Okay. I'll do better.
You're good. So this week we are going to talk about Graham Young, the teacup poisoner. Drink up. Graham Young was born in September 1947 in North London.
Should I be concerned yours is much darker than mine?
It's just the lighting. It's fine. His mother died when he was 3 months old, and his family was split apart. His father couldn't take care of him and his sister, so they were sent to live with separate relatives. When he was 2 years old, he had a nasty ear infection. This led to a really risky surgery. And later, when they examined Young's brain, they did find some damage to the right frontal lobe, which they're thinking may have played into what happens after this.
That seems to be a very common theme, that frontal lobe damage often happens, not all the time, and not everybody has frontal lobe damage, but there seems to be kind of a perfect storm, maybe between nature and nurture, and it causes some violent crimes.
Yes, yeah. And that's exactly why they think this has something to do with it. Whether it's the ear infection or the surgery itself, there was damage. When he was 3 years old, his father remarried, so he was once again thrown back into another new situation, and this time his stepmother was documented as just being horrible. She was very awful. There were a lot of issues. Young even said that his stepmother cared more about her cat than him.
Let's face it, cats can be pretty awesome.
They can be. In 1959, he passed his 11 plus exam so that he could attend secondary school. And to celebrate, his father got him a chemistry set. And from here, it goes downhill.
Lord.
This led to an obsession with chemistry. And at the same time, he was also getting into Hitler, into Nazi theology, into the occult.
He's well-rounded.
Well-rounded.
Science and history.
That's perfect. So kids study. But not that. With all of this together, he also convinced some classmates to join him in his first animal sacrifice, which happened to be his stepmother's cat. There are many other sacrifices after that as animals went missing in the neighborhood. In 1961, he got tired of the animal sacrifices and decided to use his chemistry passion to obtain antimony from a chemist. And antimony is a metalloid, and you can use it as poisoning. Its symptoms are similar to arsenic.
Kids those days, I mean, it's like... We have like warning labels for everything, and
yes.
This kid just sidles up to the chemist. It's like, hey, hook me up.
It wasn't far from that. He was very charismatic, and that's something that will be said about him throughout his life. He was very charismatic, very charming, and he had a vast knowledge of chemistry.
And Nazi rhetoric.
Yes, he might have left that out.
Okay.
It was, and that's one thing that did cause some issues. This is Britain not long after the war.
Right.
But the chemist thought he was much older and much more knowledgeable, so obviously he would be fine with it. He was not fine with it. He started poisoning mice, dissecting them, and taking very detailed notes on this. His stepmother found his stash of mice and poisons, threw it all out, and this didn't leave Young to thinking, I shouldn't do this. That led him to thinking, I should hide this better out of the house. And that's what he did. Pretty soon, the mice started boring him. He decided to move on to human testing, and his chosen victim was his only friend, Christopher Williams.
Again, that's probably the Nazi rhetoric.
Yes, that's why a lot of kids would stay away from him.
Trust your gut, kids.
Yes.
Trust your gut.
And so Christopher Williams, being a nice, sweet boy, got repaid by being poisoned in low doses over several weeks. He was in and out of the hospital. It was very bad. They couldn't figure out what was wrong with him. And Young was very frustrated. Not that his friend was in the hospital, but that he couldn't study his friend up close. So he decided, I need to stay closer to home.
So cause and effect is not a good, strong suit for the court. I poison someone, they go to the hospital, I can't study them.
Yes.
Okay.
We'll hear that a couple more times in the story, actually.
That scares me.
With his friend gone, he then moved to poisoning his sister Winifred. Gave her a cup of tea in the morning before work. It was laced with antimony. She didn't drink very much because it tasted off, but she drank enough that she started...
I don't smell almonds. We're okay.
Thallium is the one that is odorless and colorless.
Oh, it frightens me that you came up with that so quickly.
Don't worry, we'll discuss it later too. She was hallucinating. She was hospitalized. Even with just that small amount, it was still very detrimental. His family, Young's family, started looking at him, thinking, I remember the mice situation, but they searched his room and didn't find anything because he had learned to hide it outside of the home. And he blamed Winifred, saying, well, she mixes her shampoos in the teacups, so obviously she didn't clean it out well.
What?
I did not find any more information about mixing shampoos in the teacups other than Winifred did that, and everybody accepted that as a logical reason.
We're talking the 60s, right? So I'm sure, like,
Yes.
Perks had been, it was around. I mean, what?
Maybe she didn't like it. Maybe she had her
Who
own
is trusting
concoction.
these children with chemicals? We have
Their father.
we have warnings on coffee that it's too hot. And these people are just, like, making the world their chemistry set.
They are. Maybe their parents were proud. Like, look at them. They are.
All right, overachievers.
They are. That was in November of 1961. In February of 1962, Young decided to start poisoning his stepmother. She would get sick, go to the hospital, recover, come back home, get sick, go to the hospital, recover. This went on for a couple of months until a Good Friday meal when Young decided he wanted to try out his new poison, thallium.
The odorless and tasteless one?
Yes, that one.
Okay.
Drink up. She ate the meal, was dead by Easter Sunday. Young was not suspected in this in any way because they blamed her death on a prolapsed bone at the top of her spinal column from a bus accident in the prior year. And I'm not sure what the prolapsed bone at the top of the spinal column and poisoning have.
So you're telling me cause and effect is not anybody's strong suit right now?
Throughout this entire story
Okay.
story could be based on.
What is that? It's IFFT. If not, or if, what is it? I'll have a correction sometime next week.
Okay.
It's like, if then this happens. So,
Yes,
yeah.
we're not good with if-thens
Okay.
on this. She passed away. He was bored and very disinterested at the wake because he did not care about his stepmother. So to relieve that boredom, he poisoned a mustard pickle with antimony and fed it to his Uncle John. Shortly after that, very shortly after that, his father began mysteriously getting sick. The doctors gave him a special diet with pre-prepared food, but Young was still able to sneak in poison, so he kept getting sicker and sicker. The doctors did finally settle on a diagnosis of poisoning, but they couldn't decide whether it's antimony or arsenic.
Semantics.
But it's great because Young couldn't help himself. He had to talk about the difference between the two, explaining to the doctors what he felt they should have known and why it couldn't have been arsenic poisoning.
This kid reminds me of like Eddie Haskell. I mean, I could just like see him. Well, actually.
Yes. Well, actually comes up a lot and gets him in trouble throughout this entire story. That should be our corrections. Corrections
That's
corners.
awesome.
Well, actually.
Correction, yes.
Yes.
Well, actually.
So
So we'll have it a well actually next week. I'll tell you what IFFT stands for.
With his vast knowledge in front of the doctors and in front of his father, this led to much alarm, causing his father to say, "Get that child away from me." At the same time that this is going on, his school is actually starting to become very concerned because he was going around talking about becoming the most world famous poisoner one day.
Okay. Now I was a special kid. I was a little morbid. But I think I was more obsessed with becoming like a elephant washer. And not a that might have been my brother. And not a world-class poisoner. That scares
They
me.
might have a trophy or something for that.
Overachieving.
Yes. So the school decided to get involved, searched his desk, and found vials of poison. Rather than overreact and call the police, they got a psychiatrist involved.
God forbid we overreact.
Let's not do that. If you find vials of poison, call the police. Just life lesson. But they had the psychiatrist pose as a careers officer, thinking that Young was too smart to open up to a psychiatrist, but if they appealed to his ego, then maybe that would work. And it did.
This kid's love language, obviously. Obviously,
Yes.
it's like words of affirmation.
You are so right. He needs to be the smartest one in the room. Tell him he's the smartest one about poison. Wouldn't shut up. At the end of the interview, the psychiatrist said, "Yeah, it was him and he's crazy. Call the police." Thankfully, they did.
Well, that's relief.
Police are finally involved.
End of story, right?
After, yeah, you would think it'd be the end of the story. So we're on page 2.
Oh, Lord.
He was arrested. He did claim innocence.
And he's like, what, 14, 15?
Yes, he's
Okay.
14 at this time.
14.
Yes. He did claim to be innocent, but they found a vial of antimony in his shirt pocket, which led him then to discuss poisons where he couldn't shut up. And he admitted to poisoning his friend, his sister, his father, but he did not poison his stepmother. He did stay away from that one, but at that point, they didn't suspect
So you
anything.
mean the shampoo was not toxic? The shampoo that she was mixing in teacup? Okay, we're good.
Shocking.
I know.
Yes. He then proudly led police to his stash, and they
Come on, guys!
Yes. He had several stashes. Couldn't shut up. There's enough poison there to kill hundreds of people.
Well, actually, it was thousands, but
I feel like that would be how he would start every conversation. Well, actually, in July of 1962, he was charged with attempted murder of his friend, sister, and father. He pled guilty, was found guilty, and was sentenced to 15 years at Broadmoor Institute, which is Broadmoor Hospital, which is a psychiatric institution. The second youngest ever to be
wow.
admitted there. That was in July. In August, John Barrage, who was a fellow resident who happened to snore too loud.
I'm telling you, that could husband and wives get a CPAP machine. That could drive anybody.
It could. But in this case, he was found dead of cyanide poisoning, even though there was no cyanide found on the premises. Officials were confused about this, but Young was happy to explain, well, actually,
I kind of hate this kid.
cyanide can be extracted from laurel bushes, which happen to populate.
Let me show you
The
how to do
grounds.
it, but I didn't do it.
But officials didn't think he could do it, and they ruled the death a suicide.
Well, actually, he could have.
Yes. After this, He did continue to voraciously read books about medical textbooks, toxicology textbooks from the prison's own library, and decorate his room with occult symbols, Nazi symbols, all of that. Surprisingly, in order to prove that he could reform, they decided that he should be in charge of serving tea. I can't even look at you with a straight face. Serving tea to the inmates and staff.
You know that meme of Picard where he's just like this? I feel like I just need to do.
Yeah, that's keeping in mind this is not long after he was admitted for poisoning. Not surprisingly, staff started showing up with poison symptoms, as did inmates. It turned out he added toilet cleaner to the staff tea, and the general population had another cleaning agent added to their tea. They then placed him in a separate area for his safety and the safety of others.
Good.
A common threat in the institution that nurses would say when someone was acting up was, "I'll have Graham make you a cup of tea."
That's awesome.
That was his legacy that he had. So when 3 years later, in 1965, he applied for release, they denied it. His father and aunt even showed up to protest the release. Graham learned not poison people, but to maybe tone down the talk about poison, the actual poisoning, and he also toned down his Nazi occult talk and started showing remorse.
Okay.
He would write about it, he would talk about it whenever doctors were listening. So in 1970, when he was 22 years old, a prison psychiatrist did recommend his release, stating that Young no longer obsessed with poisons, violence, and mischief, and he is no longer a danger to others. Young celebrated this by telling a nurse, "When I get out, I'm going to kill one person for every year I've spent in this place." He was released in February of 1971.
Yep.
Right after his release, he forged a letterhead from Bedford College to obtain antimony and thallium from a chemist for collegiate research.
You can just get that over. I mean, can you hook me up? I mean, what?
He was denied at first and then had to come back with the letterhead because they wouldn't just sell it to him. He had to have a reason for it, from an official reason for it, and
we didn't check references.
We did not check references.
Okay. Check references, people.
That'll come up later too. Right after his release, again, this is February of 1971.
And we're still talking very young man.
22 years old.
Okay.
He attended a storekeeper's training course to begin his career life, and he met Trevor Sparks. Trevor Sparks became mysteriously ill over the next several weeks, was in and out of the hospital. He left in April and did recover, but he still had long-term health issues. That was in April.
Okay.
In May of this year, again after just being released in February, he became an assistant storekeeper for John Hadland Laboratories in Bovingdon. It's either Bovingdon or Bovingdon. I heard it pronounced both ways. I'm going to maybe settle on Bovingdon.
Sounds more fancy.
It does,
Yeah.
Bovingdon. And ironically, this laboratory produced thallium.
Of course it did.
It wasn't kept on site. It was kept away from him.
But laurel bushes were.
Well, he had his own stash, so it didn't even matter.
Okay, good.
He did, in his interview, he did admit to being in Broadmoor to explain his lapse in employment, but he blamed it on a nervous breakdown due to his mother's death in a car accident.
Wasn't he 3 months old when that happened?
He was 3 months old when his mother died, I believe it was of tuberculosis, and his stepmother died from poisoning.
Okay, so nobody checked out that reference either.
Nobody checked out Broadmoor to see why he was really there.
Okay.
Again, he used his charisma to...
HR managers, if you are listening, call the references.
Call them every time.
3 deep. 3 deep.
One of his duties as the new assistant storekeeper was to serve tea to employees. You'll be shocked, poisoning started immediately.
You don't say.
The first one that we will document was Bob Eggle. Bob Eggle began, he was poisoned with thallium in June, leading to on and off hospitalization again, as we'll hear. While he was in the hospital, Young would constantly call the hospital for updates, asking on his condition and what his symptoms were
He was a
like.
little notebook.
That's exactly what it was for. He was keeping detailed notes in his notebook and his diary about what was happening to Bob. So it was not out of concern at all. But when Bob passed away on July 7th, 1971, Young was chosen as the department representative for the funeral, to attend the funeral, since he had shown so much care and concern for Bob.
What a nice guy.
But while this was going on with Bob, Young was once again frustrated because his subject wasn't there close to him to study. So he moved right on to Ron Hewitt.
Cause and effect. Cause and effect.
Ron Hewitt was poisoned with antimony this time. He was leaving the company anyway, so once he left, he recovered, but not fully. Next was Diana Smart. Young began dosing Diana Smart's tea with small amounts of antimony, and he admitted he would do this when she irritated him, and even wrote that he regretted not giving her larger doses.
Oh, this is like a bad TV sitcom. I mean, it's like...
It is.
It really is. I can see her as like, did you ever see Office Space?
Yes.
Yeah. Good morning. Good morning.
Maybe that was it. Maybe that's what set him off. David Tilson was the next in October of 1971. Again, he just got released in February. We're in October. David Tilson got thallium in his tea. It is odorless, it is tasteless, but Young wanted to make sure and sweeten the tea. It was overly sweetened for David's liking, so he only had a few sips, even though there was a lethal dose in there. But with those few sips, it was enough to lead to hospitalization. When he recovered, he came back to work, where he got sick again. But Young learned his lesson on this. Rather than one large dose, he did start poisoning him again, but slowly over
Smaller
time.
doses.
Yes.
I just can see him like just over the like cubby with his like notebook. Just like, how's your tea, Dia?
Uh-huh. It seems like that. But he also was poisoning people on a large scale too. So these seem to be the people that he was particularly interested in. But that didn't stop him from just poisoning everyone that he could. With David Tilson in and out of the hospital, the department needed help, so Jethro Batt stood up and decided to help. This time, Young made coffee, but made it too strong for Jethro, so once again, he only had a couple sips. It was a lethal dose, but he only had a few sips. He was out of the hospital, and like Tilson, he recovered, but never fully, always had long-term side effects from the poisoning. Finally, we have Fred Biggs. At the end of October, Young began poisoning Fred with thallium, leading to the on and off again hospitalization. Like with Bob, he was very concerned, called the hospital repeatedly, updated his diary, and Fred died on November 19th, 1971. So in the middle of all this, because this is a lot going on, the company was concerned. The company did send out...
The company was concerned.
They did send out people to even test the water. They tested for radiation from an airfield nearby. It became known as the Bovingdon bug or Bovingdon bug because everybody in this laboratory seemed to be getting sick. And they couldn't explain why. Diana Smart even suggested that maybe Young was like a typhoid Mary because she noticed everyone was getting sick but him. So when they couldn't find anything wrong with the water, with any virus, doctors did rule out heavy metal poisoning, but that led to an argument with the man who couldn't shut up.
Well, actually...
Yes. He insisted that the symptoms were very much heavy metal poisoning, and he waxed on about toxicology And that prompted a phone call to police when the company finally said, I think we found our source.
Red flag.
Yes. The police did investigate him. They discovered that the Bovingdon bug started right about when Young started. They discovered that he wasn't at Broadmoor for a nervous breakdown. He was at Broadmoor because he had poisoned his family. They arrested him on November 20th, 1971, the same year that he was released. He asked them, which one is it you're doing me for? But then denied all charges. Once the police discovered his diary, his stash of poisons in the room that he was staying in, they presented him with this. He then admitted to every poisoning, including his stepmother's. Because of that, he did also say that he didn't see them as people. He saw them as guinea pigs. This trial started in June of 1972. He was charged with 2 counts of murder, 2 counts of attempted murder, 8 counts of causing grievous bodily harm. At the trial, he recanted his confession, saying that the diary was simply the beginning of a novel, and he used the poisons to help himself sleep.
Again, what are we just? We're just like randomly playing with stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and shockingly, the jury didn't buy any of that. After 10 days of trial, they deliberated for
10 days.
It took 10 days. Well, there were 75 witnesses. And interestingly enough, 75 witnesses, the only witness for him was himself.
Oh, Lord.
Where, on stand, he waxed on again about toxicology and his knowledge of poisons. So I'm shocked that it even took the jury an hour and 38 minutes to decide.
Be like going through the door. Everybody
we all agree.
We're good?
Yes.
Okay, let's have some tea.
No. I imagine after that you probably never drink tea again.
No, I'd go coffee.
Yes. No. Well,
He did good. Yeah.
Yeah, he did coffee too.
And I like my coffee strong, so I'm having trouble if somebody hands me some.
You were.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
You haven't drank all your tea yet. I'm just putting. So, he was found guilty of both murders, both attempted murders, and 2 counts of poisoning, and was sentenced to life in a maximum security prison.
Where he became a cafeteria worker.
Luckily, it stopped. They learned their lesson. Everybody figured this out. They learned their lesson. No more tea. He was not allowed to serve anybody anything. He died on August 1st in 1990, just before his 43rd birthday.
Wow.
He's still very young.
Very young.
It was listed as heart disease, but he had no history of heart disease, so it's rumored that maybe it was a suicide, or that somebody, an inmate or staff,
Mixed his shampoo in a tea thing?
Yes.
Okay.
I can't imagine they'd feel that comfortable around him.
Yeah, I would think so too.
So
I'm seeing like a Hannibal Lecter, and he just, instead of the mouth being closed, being like, well, actually.
And mittens, put mittens on him so he can't. But the good out of this is that this did lead to several procedural changes, including the release of offenders, their supervision after release, that would have been key here.
Yes.
And the expansion of mental health services.
Well, that's at least a good thing.
Yes.
You know, from tragedy at least comes
Something. Yes.
Yeah, though I would, that's a lot of red flags.
So many. There's so many times that it should have been stopped, that somebody should have stepped in, but it wasn't.
And it just kills me. I trust you.
Yes.
Even though you've poisoned a bunch of people, can you make me some tea?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, that was a very interesting case. I had actually
Yes.
not heard that one before, which is rare that you can stump me. So that's pretty cool. So now we'll go to our real estate part of the show. So.
Yeah, and I actually had a question I was going to ask you.
Sure.
I had a buyer that was driving by a vacant house, wanted to know, said it had been vacant a year. They were really interested in it. I couldn't find any records on it. It's not bank owned.
So it's in the people's name still?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're actually hearing this a lot in the news. It has a really fun name, zombie foreclosures.
That's right up your alley.
It is right up my alley. I love zombies. So, and it's just, perfect that I'm a distressed property specialist.
Yes.
So, a zombie foreclosure is basically when an owner gets a notice of default, and instead of kind of pursuing a loss mitigation option like a short sale, they go ahead and they just leave the house.
Okay.
And, foreclosures can get paused and stopped for a lot of different reasons. And so most likely that foreclosure got stalled and it's just sitting vacant and it's in the seller's name. And that's dangerous because, insurance will either cancel or raise their premium, God forbid, natural disaster, somebody breaking in. It's not a good situation. So, you're going to get a lot of calls like that. A lot of realtors are, especially in this buyer's market. People are looking everywhere for the perfect house for themselves.
And we're going to start seeing that more.
Yeah, we're going to start seeing that a lot more. So people are going to be fleeing instead of really looking at all their options. So, definitely. Not a lot you can do as an agent. You can try to contact the sellers and see if they're going to be willing to sell. A lot of times if they've already left, they really have no interest and they're done.
Yes.
So, so that's a zombie foreclosure.
Thank you.
No problem. So we'll be back in 2 weeks with another case. It's going to be my turn. And another corner. I'm sure we'll come up with something that we need to edit or change up. So this has been Crimes and Closings with Jenny Olsen Payton.
Dia Kaplan.
And you guys have a great day.
See you later.